Hello everybody! My name is Sherry Shish. I'm the designer of Wave Pool Block of the Month, and this is month 6. We are going to be making this really fun snail tail block, and it's the last block that we're making for this quilt. So if you are looking for, I just realized this is crooked. If you are looking for months 1 through 5, there are separate videos for those on my YouTube channel. Go ahead and go watch those first, and let's make those blocks. These blocks here, we're going to be making 16 of them today, and we are going to be making them for the border. So this is the top and the bottom of that quilt. I just realized I don't have a paper version of the quilt pattern, so we're going to go get ahead and get started. There are 2 different types of fabrics that you are going to be using for this quilt block today, and that is going to be fabric I and fabric J. And honestly, after you cut your fabric, since this is the last month and you forgot or didn't label which one was I or J, it doesn't matter. As you notice that this block, as long as you have this swirl in place, that's all that really matters. So you are going to have multiple different squares, okay? You have your little itty bitty tiny squares. These here will stay as squares. All right, these will stay as something that you will just be making this 4-patch in the very middle of this block to be. And then we have other squares that we are going to be doing some diagonal cuts and or some straight cuts. So one of the things I highly recommend you do is either label your squares or cut them as you go. And what I mean by that is you'll want to cut, so your smallest set of squares, you're going to want to cut these in half. And so I'm going to go ahead and take a ruler and I'm going to cut a couple of these in half. I'm going to double check something. Hi Tessa, hi Hard Made Easy. I just wanted to make sure that I was live. And thank you for chatting. So that way I know you guys can hear me. So we are going to cut these in half from corner to corner. Because I just cut these in stacks, I'm just going to go ahead and just cut a stack of them. Typically, I do not cut any more than 6 layers of fabric at a time. Any more than that, I find that that'd be a little on if the fabric will shift on you. So you're going to be very carefully cutting from corner to corner, and you're going to line your ruler up so you can hit both points and go all the way across like so. Okay? You would essentially go ahead and for this size, go ahead and cut everything into half square triangles. I'm going to go ahead and do that so I don't make this mistake later. I'm only going to go ahead and sew one of these blocks today, but we will have 16 total blocks that we're going to be sewing. Okay. So these are all going to get cut in half. No problem. Like so. Okay. Now, the next size up is this size, okay? And this next size up, you are going to be cutting quarter square triangles. So again, you're going to be cutting, I'm going to try to make this back into straight. You're going to be cutting them in diagonal 1 and diagonal 2. So like we did with the smaller size, we're going to go ahead and just make our one cut from corner to corner. But instead of picking this up and moving them, we're going to go ahead and align the ruler directly from the other corner to corner on the diagonal to cut them in fourths. Okay? You don't want to move these between your diagonal cuts because then things get kind of goofy. I'm going to go ahead and get these cut as well. And I'm really only wanting to cut every single one of these really early because otherwise they're only a couple eighths of an inch apart in size, and then you kind of can get a little confusing on what they're looking for, okay? So you have those. Then your second to largest size, you have a bigger square. These are going to be cut in half, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and cut these in half, very similar to what we did before with the smallest size. So these go cut in half, like so. this shifted on me. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that that is the correct size. All right. And then diagonal. The largest set of squares that you have, I believe these are all the large size, yep. The large size of squares that you have, these will be cut in quarter square triangles. I'm going to go ahead, go corner to corner, and corner to corner the other way. And the reason why I want you to cut all of these at the beginning is to remind yourself of what layer they go on. Because now you have 4 distinct triangles. You have a small, medium, like large, and an extra large or something like that. And it's much easier to tell the difference here than it is to tell the difference on the smaller squares, or like the squares that you did. So the triangles I find just flat out easier to deal with. So I'm going to do the same thing here with our print squares. So the smallest ones again get cut in half. So I'm going to go ahead and cut these in half, like so. And I apologize, we're going to spend a good little bit here in the beginning just prepping our fabric, because otherwise, if we don't do it all at once, what's going to end up happening is you end up remeasuring this square over and over again to remember, hey, is this a quarter square or is this a half square? So we're going to go ahead and chop all of these. Okay. And you'll want to make sure that you do a clean diagonal to diagonal. If you get off, you're going to want to redo your square, because then your final block won't end up the correct size. Okay, we have those. And then we have the size up. These are going to be quarter square triangles, so 2 cuts on both diagonals. And again, don't lift up the fabric when you rotate your ruler, and you'll want to cut diagonal to diagonal without moving the fabric. Oops. That did not cut all the way. There we go. Like so. And I'm going to repeat that for the other print. Now in the pattern, I do detail out the 4 patch. When we get there, as long as you make a 4 patch with the 2 colors, you can rotate it whichever way you decided, okay? Just so you know, I'm probably going to be making off of this block because I find it faster than reading the pattern, but for those of you that want to follow the pattern directly, you will want to make sure you read which fabrics go where. Alright, so the next size up, that isn't the largest, but the second to largest, is a half square triangle, so you're just cutting them in half. Okay. I did cut some extras, so this block here was the block that I put on the blog yesterday. You can find that at poweredbyquilting.com. What ended up happening is typically I usually take photos when I'm making the original quilt, and I forgot to take photos in month 6. So I used this quilt along photos of the block that I finished for the blog posts. So there are a couple that I've already have cut in our half square triangles, and then now for the very large ones, these are going to be cut in quarter square triangles. So there's 2 diagonals across for these. So if you're wondering why it looks like I'm cutting less than the entirety of month 6, is because I am. I already have some of them cut. And so now I have 4 distinct triangle shapes, and we can start sewing. Okay. The first part of this quilt block is the center, where it's the 4 patch. You can follow the instructions, or you can just lay out your 4-patch in the appropriate size or the appropriate layout. So mine is going to be light blue, dark blue in opposite corners with a white square on the other sides, okay? And I'm going to make a 4-patch sewing. So I'm going to sew these two together, sew them together, and then sew the long side. All right, take that to the machine. Honestly, it doesn't matter which direction you sew the 4-patch, as long as the 4-patch is sewn together in that orientation where the two colors are diagonal at each other and the backgrounds are on the other diagonal. I'm going to go ahead and press my seams towards the print fabric here. I'm just going to finger press them because these are pretty small. And then I'm going to sew that long seam together. All right, so once we have sewn that seam together, I'm going to go ahead and press my little tiny 4-patch. In the pattern, I also give you relative or general block sizing after every layer that we're adding, okay? So it's pretty good to double check that your block is generally that shape, but because we're sewing on the bias and because we're kind of like doing diagonals a lot, just know that if you're slightly off, it'll be okay. This block is fairly forgiving, even if it doesn't seem like it. When you start putting the blocks together as your seams, if they don't 100% match, no one's really going to notice that much unless you're judging this quilt or you're submitting it for jury, because the wave portion gives so much movement that a slight kind of offset of a corner or a point or something like that isn't going to be super noticeable. So this next step, so we have our 4-patch. We're going to start with our first layer, which is our smallest triangle. You're going to need one of the print, one of each print, I guess is what I should say, and then 2 of the background squares. So this is why I'm like, it's way easier to do it this way. I go and say, okay, well, you need this size squares, half square triangle, or quarter square triangle or whatever, right? I tell you which ones that you need to use. If you just cut everything in your triangles, it is the smallest one, okay? And we're gonna lay it out like so. And the way that you're gonna look at it is the block that has that print in it, in the that print, you're gonna go to the right. It's gonna go to the right with it on top. So this is on top, it's gonna go to the right. When I rotate this block, this will be on top, it's gonna go to the right, okay? So that's how the swirl pattern is gonna work. I like to sew opposite sides together, press, and then sew opposite sides together, and then press. In order to align them where they're in the correct orientation of like, okay, so how do I sew this on this line? Like, do I start at the point at the bottom? Do I start at the point at the top? What you want to do, because this is a 4-patch, you have your lines of where the center of the block already there with your seam lines. You're going to want to put the point on that line and then align the raw edges. So do you see how my point is on the line where the dark blue fabric and the white meet? That's the seam line. That's where that point's going to meet. And my raw edges on the right side is how I'm going to sew that down. I'm going to sew that down. I'm going to open it, and I'm going to sew the dark blue on the other side with that point matching that center line. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and do that. This is really similar to month 2, where we did the same kind of block, but we started with a solid square in the middle. And in month 2, we talked about folding our square in half to find the center point. This is the same thing, except the seam line is our center point because we had a 4-patch. All right. So you can finger press some of these, or you can use an iron, either way. It's up to you on your process. Sometimes you may find it easier to have a finger pressing tool next to your sewing machine, so you don't have to keep getting up to the iron. I would also recommend, and I almost forgot, I would chain piece all 16 blocks together. Meaning, I wouldn't be doing one block at a time. I would say, okay, I'm going to make all 16 of my 4 patches. I'm going to sew all 16 of this light blue, all 16 of this dark blue, and then work on this background on both sides. I'm going to sew both of these on both sides. And that way you're using up everything at one time and you're just chain piecing one direction. That will be much, much faster to get everything done. Especially since you have 16 of these blocks to make. Making them one at a time is kind of slow. Okay, so I've sewn these together. Yeah, just thought of that. You want to do them all together. It makes it a little bit faster, and then you're not having to get up and iron for every single one of these things all at once. You can get up and iron all 16 blocks at one time. Okay. One thing that I will recommend, so now that you have your first layer done, I will recommend getting some scissors and cutting off your dog ears, okay? You can leave them, but they just kind of add bulk where you don't really need it, okay? And then I do give you instructions on how big your block is supposed to be at this point, but it's okay. So again, if I have my light blue at the top right, we're going to keep going to the right. So my next triangle for blue, I need one of each, is going to go right here. Okay? Does that make sense? And then my blue is going to go here. And then I'm going to have 2 of the white pieces like so. So that's the next layer that I'm going to do. So that I did layer 1, layer 2. Now when I add my layer 2 square, like triangle, I'm like, uh-oh, I don't have a center line anymore. What you can do here is fold your block in half. My poor iron is leaking water, so give me a second. You're going to fold your block in half, and do you see how I have now a crease line? I'm going to do that again for the other side, because I know I'm going to need it, right, for when I add the white fabric. So now I have nice little creases for that center. And then I can say, okay, I'm going to put that point with that center. Oh, I need to line up my raw edge with that raw edge side. And then I'm going to do that for the other side for the blue. So I'm going to go ahead and do both of those. One thing you'll need to be careful on is that you're not tugging or pulling any of the edges of your block or your triangles. Everything is kind of on the bias as you're sewing this together. So it'd be very easy for the fabric to stretch. So you want to be very careful. You're not pushing or pulling the fabric. You just want to guide it through your machine. All right, so I have these two. I'm going to go ahead and press those open. Knowing that like I have seam lines pressed in the middle, you just kind of want to be careful that you're not you're not ironing out the temporary lines that you just ironed in the middle to know where your centers are, just so you know, like you're going to have to re-iron those if you iron them out. So I'm going to go ahead and put the white background. I'm going to line that center line, align my raw edges, and I'm going to do that for the other side when I get there. Yes, I could see that happening too. It's like a snail trail. I don't know exactly if cattails are the same. I will say I'm really bad at what the block name is supposed to be. So I'm not the best. I'd have to look that up. But maybe? I think. It's like a snail. I don't remember if a snail trail or a cattail. Block names are not my forte. So I would say Google is my friend on figuring those out. Okay, so I have those two sides done. I'm going to go ahead and press those seams out. And so layer 2 is complete. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and trim off the corners like I did last time. I give you guidelines on what size your block is supposed to be after every layer. If you're really adamant on cutting your block to that size, more power to you. I don't really trim these blocks until the very end. That's just my personal preference. Again, I'm doing light blue at the very top right. So now I'm on layer 3. So it's my third largest triangle now. That's going to go to my right. Makes it a little easy, right? Like so. And then I'm going to grab 2 background triangles, and it looks like this. Now, because we're back to where that 4 patch is perpendicular, right, with a 90, 0, 180, we are going to go ahead and align our square, or our triangle, to the 4 patch center lines. Like so. Same side on this one. I'm going to go ahead and press that, and then we're going to add in our 2 backgrounds for the sides. Okay, I'm going to add in my 2 backgrounds. Again, this is going to be that center line of the 4 patch. So I'm going to go ahead and add those. Now there is something I want to make sure that we mention. I think this is right. It is this layer. I'm trying to think if I said layer 2 or layer 3 on the blog. It is layer 3 for month 6. This is the same size as layer 2 on month 2, but layer 3 on month 6. Where if you had an original copy of the pattern, if you had a digital copy, I'm pretty sure I sent that all out, so you should have an updated version. But if you have an original print version copy, I said this measures 7 inches. It is 6 7/8. It's actually just less than that, actually, in terms of what size this is supposed to be. So that's why I'm I put those back in to kind of help guide where your blocks are supposed to be on the way out. But if you want to cut them to a precise measurement, this is 6 7/8, not 7 inches. I don't know what I did that first time. I think I made a mistake in rounding somewhere, and yeah, I was off. So we are doing our final layer. Okay, so we have to go back to aligning with that little seam line that we pressed in the middle. It's very faint right now. I can barely see it, but it's still noticeable for me. So I'm going to put that tip of my triangle to that point and then align my raw edges on both sides. And then we will be almost done. Ah, thank you. I love how these turn into waves. I'm actually happy that I have another block here so I can show you the two blocks together. I really love this pattern and how it turned out. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to do a full assembly stream yet, because honestly there's a couple other things going on in my life personally that make it difficult to stream next month in terms of working and other commitments and things like that. So I may not actually be streaming the full assembly of this quilt top until October or at all. So we'll see how that goes. All right, so we're gonna do that for the other side now, of making sure that we can get everything in. We have our block. We're going to go iron this. And then on this one, the dog ears, I don't usually cut off with scissors because at this point, I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to go ahead and measure to the correct size. So these blocks finish at 9.5 inches. I want to make sure that my 9.5 inches is appropriate. It should be very, very close, if not the correct size. So I'm going to go ahead and trim off where applicable. I think I kind of got off on this side a little bit, but it's okay. I'm going to go ahead and do that. So those are just the dog ears. This side's a little bit off a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay. So my blue kind of got a little wonky, but it's okay at the end of the day because these waves are going to mask anything that you're kind of off on, okay? So for the quilt top, it's either this way or the other way, like I can show you both. So this is what's going to end up happening. You're going to sew 2 blocks together. Really, there are 8 blocks overall. You have your light blue, and then when you sew these 2 together, your that's part of your seam, and then this wave will kind of connect. Don't worry if this is slightly off. If there's a slight break in this, you're not going to notice in the wave pattern. And then the other side, if you kept going, will have a darker wave on it as well. All right, so you're going to make a total of 16 blocks. 8 for the top border, 8 for the bottom border. And this actually concludes the Wave Pool Block of the Month kind of sew along, quilt along portion of it outside of the final quilt top assembly. I need to figure out when we're actually going to do that. It won't be in September, unfortunately, because I am out of town traveling for work. But maybe in October, or I'll just have to do a blog post that kind of shows that sewing the quilt top together, I mean. Anyways, thank you guys so much for sewing along. If you haven't bought the quilt pattern or the quilt kit, links are below in the video, and I will see you guys next time. We are planning on doing another sew along starting later this fall on Transparent Stars. Unfortunately, I'm probably not going to be kitting that one, and we may do some fun other bigger pillows or something with that one instead of making the whole quilt for those that don't want to do that. I will talk to you guys later. Ciao!